All right, I will turn it over to our conductor, Joe.
Thank you. Happy Thursday, everybody. Welcome. It's good to see you all. Thank you for being here. To get us started, I think it'd be really helpful for all of us to check in, so that some of you I know more than others, and also you may or may not know each other. And so I think just for this first round, you don't have to go too in depth into what your work is necessarily. There will be another opportunity to talk more about the work that you're doing if you want to do that. But for the first check-in, if everyone could share, who you are, what work you're doing, or interests that you have related to leadership and RPGs, and why you decided to come to this roundtable. That'll help us all kind of get a grasp of who we're working with here. I'll get us started. My name's Joe Lastly. One of the things that I do is I'm an assistant professor of leadership and organizational studies. So I teach and research leadership and experiential learning and leadership learning. I also research leadership development and group dynamics in role-playing games, and have an independent consulting business that I work with clients to do leadership consulting and leadership coaching, and also game-based design for leadership workshops and development experiences. So that's a little bit about what I do. And I actually kind of worked with Suzanne to try and create these and continue having these conversations because I'm very excited about the topic, and it's new enough and kind of scattered enough that there's not an organization to go to. There's the International Leadership Association, but they're not the Leadership Role-Playing Game Association. So I'm trying to get us folks together to collaborate and see what's going on out there. All right. I'll kind of list you how you're on my screen for a speaking order, just to keep things going. We'll go with Antonio and Gary.
Hi everyone, my name is Antonio Ruiz. I am originally from Mexico, but I'm living in Florida, United States right now. I am a PhD student, hopefully soon to be a PhD candidate. I just finished my prelim exam, so we'll hear what happens in 2 weeks. But I study leadership and game design, and I try to merge those things in when I teach leadership. I guess that's the other part of my job. I do research and teach leadership at FSU, Florida State University, for those who are not from the country. And yeah, I mean, I was here for the last conversation. I participated with Suzanne and Joe at ILA a couple of months ago, and we did a little roundtable on this very same topic. So I'm just continuing the conversation and seeing where we go.
Hi, everyone. Gary Malante. I'm an economist. I used to work for the World Bank and was in charge of teaching one of their courses for people working in fragile and conflict-affected countries. And now I'm a consultant, work with a number of different peace-building organizations. And we're interested in adaptive leadership and how that can be taught to peace builders. There's a lot of overlap there. I can get more into detail on the applications later.
Matt and Heis.
Hi everyone, my name is Matyas from Hungary. I'm a PhD student. I'm in my third year here, finishing the studies. I research leadership development and role play, but I use a quite broad perspective. So not just tabletop role playing games or LARPs, but my research focus also includes like analog simulations, applied drama, improv theater, and stuff like that. And recently, it was just last week, I demoed my leadership development game to a Hungarian consulting firm, and it was a huge success. They even hired me. So yeah, that was a quite milestone in my life. Pleasure to meet you. By the way, adaptive leadership was one of my topic. I sort of dropped it because I wanted to focus on learning and development. But in leadership, I'm interested in two topics. First, adapting to external environment changes and integrating paradoxes. Thank you.
Well, congrats, Matthias, on that milestone. My name is Gijs van Bilze. As I said, any way you pronounce it, even remotely resembles it, I'll try and react to it. It's a difficult name outside of the Netherlands, which is where I'm based. I've started my career with a master's thesis on theatrical simulation and how to lead improvisational teams or innovation teams. So we've tried to use improvisational theatrical improvisation as a research method. And then I went into practice, had my own consultancy firm for a bit, where we applied that with companies. From that, I went into serious gaming, developed lots of different games for lots of different companies, non-profit and profit. And hobby-wise, I discovered LARPing, which I am very much totally into, and basically covers all of my weekends. And well, not all, well, half of my weekends maybe. And from there, I decided to merge those two interests, professionally and hobby. And I'm now designing a 2-day LARP on leadership, which will take place in April. On which I have 10 participants already and 10 staff members who are going to make sure that they learn the best out of what they can get out of that LARPing experience. I think that's the short version for now.
All right, Garrett, would you like to introduce yourself?
Certainly. Oh, sorry, my video was off. There you go. I had some connection problems before. Hi, Garrett Dwem. I am Suzanne's partner in crime here at CCL. I've been helping her now for about 2 years, and been working especially this past year on developing our own community resilience workshop based on the notion of LARPing and gameplay, getting people to improvise as they face pretend disaster. Is in decision theory and went on to have a career 20 years in user experience and user design, and then needed a left turn and talked to Suzanne, who had a project in mind. So I helped her with her initial research project, and I've stuck on ever since, and been enjoying this very much.
All right, Suzanne, you did a pretty good job introducing yourself right away. Would you like to, do you want to say anything more?
Yeah, I'll say a little bit of myself personally. One of the things that is interesting is my first career was actually in theater. I was a professional stage manager and lighting designer. My undergraduate degree was in theater arts. Worked professionally for a number of years. Then I went into computer science, had a career as a computer scientist, programmer, and went into user experience design, which all of that feeds into what I'm doing now. After 9/11, discovered I had a passion for disaster management and realized that there is very little preparedness for the 90% or the 98% of the people who are actually doing disaster management, who happen to be the people who just happen to be there. And that for that grassroots emergent response, for those emergent groups to succeed, improvised leadership, learning that improvised leadership has to happen. Someone or some group of people has to give the group vision, direction. So I've actually done some studies, some groundwork studying improvised leadership. I have a big study after Hurricane Harvey, studying an incident of that. But then also realizing that if you're going to train people and give them the skills and the mindsets of we can do it, so we have leadership emerging, experiential learning, gamification, that's the way to go, I think. You know, you're not going to put them in a classroom and have them get engaged and interested and actually figure out how to do it. It's very much discovery based. So that is where my interests are.
All right. I'll also, I'm assuming creatives otter.ai is not a person. You're muted, Suzanne.
That's automatic transcription from otter.ai.
Until AI become people, we'll wait for that to happen for now. I'll also mention that Amanda, who's not here, is a student in the PhD in Leadership Studies program, and her interest is in RPG leadership development, specifically using tabletop role-playing games to do work with police and police departments and their culture of police departments, something along those lines. Of course, she would have a much better explanation of it than I do. And then Samantha Funk, who's wasn't able to make it, just finished her master's thesis this fall, or at the end of the summer, really, about leadership. She did an integrative literature review on leadership studies and role-playing games, and talked quite a bit about adaptive leadership and creativity and creative leadership in some of her findings. So, yeah.
I have one thing now that we talked about Otter, because I did not, it hadn't started, but the Otter AI does actually do a live transcription. So there's another document where you can follow the transcription, and I believe you can make corrections. So feel free to see what's going on there. And if you see errors, please help transcribe them. It'll save time later.
All right, so this is a round table. So the people here are bringing the material that we have to work with. And last year, when we did the first one of these, it was their question was, what is the intersection of leadership studies and role-playing game studies? And we're trying to take another step in that and to see what work is happening out there right now. And so at least from the people who are here, I'd invite each of us to talk about what work you're doing at the intersection of leadership studies and role-playing game studies, or what interest or idea for work that you would like to do that you're bringing if you aren't currently doing a project. And to speak a little bit about what the work is or what the interest is, more than just stating it. Kind of give us some information and allow us to ask questions if you're willing to have a discussion about your work, so that we can kind of understand what is going on out there. And then we'll move into a discussion about potential collaborations or new ideas, and we'll see if it's relevant to this group or not. But the International Leadership Association conference happens in October, but their proposal submissions are due in February. And so I will be going, and I would like to submit a proposal about leadership and RPGs, and I'm happy to collaborate. But if enough of us aren't going or don't want to collaborate on that, we can think of other ideas to do as well. So to get us started, does anyone want us to be first, to have a project that you're currently working on that you want to tell us more about what it is?
Well, we're Dutch are famously direct, so if nobody steps up, then I'll do it as a Dutchman. And I do like to talk about the project, and have spent the entire day on it, so my head's full of it as well. So as I said, I'm doing a 2-day LARP on leadership development that's made from scratch based on the learning goals of the participants. So it starts out with an intake of all 10 participants, of their learning goals, and then translating that into different roles. We are doing that based on core quality quadrants, if you're familiar with that, which is a really simple model to map someone's personality in terms of qualities, pitfalls, allergies, and challenges. And then making a role for that same quadrant that is slightly different from the person, and then see how all of these 10 people or 10 roles now interact with each other. and how they can also help each other to be better leaders according to what they want to achieve. That's how do you say, assisted by 2 executive coaches, 2 trainers, and 6 actors who will portray various roles that they mainly for their own team, so the people that they are leading. Let's pause there and see if there are any questions that I can steer towards. I can talk at length on this. I won't.
I don't have a,
sorry.
Sorry, I don't have a question, but I want to take a note that there's a big research question in there for me around how do you reduce the overhead of running these kinds of things? How do you manage it so you get the learning and the practice outcomes and the facilitation without having 6 actors and having all those people?
Yeah.
So my suggestion is start a question of research questions here.
Let's put that down into notes. That's for me. This is, I'm doing it nonprofit. Every member of staff is doing this basically because I asked them nicely, and they're not getting paid or anything. I'm not getting paid. I just want to do this. Next step for me would be either to see how we can get really wealthy people, really rich people to do this, so we can do it with this crazy amount of overhead. But I would really love to then bring it down and make it more accessible for a lot of people.
Yeah, and we want community organizations to be able to run them.
Yeah,
you know,
and
so it's I
think the main answer would lie in how to help the participants help each other. How can you give them the burden of helping each other while at the same time helping them learn themselves? And I don't know yet, but I think that's one of the possible avenues to answer your question, Suzanne. Antonio.
Yes. I mean, as a leadership educator myself, I'm just really curious. What is there a specific leadership theory that you're using as to build your curriculum for this experience, or how are you going about? What definition of leadership or what ideas of leadership are you using as a foundation for this?
We're using Hershey and Blanchard's situational leadership as a light foundation, but have chosen to be like model neutral. We're not based off one model. Our basis is the learning goals of the participants, and we will work from there. So we will not say that adaptive leadership is a good way of leadership. If somebody wants to learn to be more directive, then we will work on that. If somebody says we want to be more servant leadership, we will work on that. And we will work on that at the same time for different participants.
Cool, thank you.
Any other questions or topics that you would like to explore in this?
Yeah, I have one about the game system. Is there an established game system you're using, or are you using a set of core mechanics? How did you make that decision? And are the players familiar already with the game?
Yeah, we're not using a game system. We're going for very much what you see is what you get type of system. The setting will be modern, will be a company, so we will not be playing in fantasy or in a world far removed from where we are. It will be also modern, and they will play managers in a company, in a reorganization. So we felt we didn't need any game mechanics, as we will not be playing out anything that they are not able to do themselves.
I think that's a great question. How do you handle onboarding? Or if you have a 2-day event, so you've got a fair amount of time to get players onboarded, how do they respond to the model, and how do you get them to understand what the expectations are, onboarding them into the experience?
We're doing 2 one-hour intake sessions online prior, one with the trainers and one with the coaches. The trainers will be me and one other person who also designed the LARP and who will also have an in-game function as the retreat trainer, the trainer who leads the retreat in-game, and the executive coaches will be only off-game. And with both of them, we will do a 1-hour intake on learning goals and what do you want. And then when we start the 2, I think roughly 5 hours, 4 to 5 hours of the first day will be spent on workshops, both about emotional, physical safety, about leadership theories, and then about how to play out and act out a role, and also how to play up the other participants and how to help them reach their learning goal. Does that answer your question?
Yes, yeah. And it raises another whole question for me around different types of audiences, because we have community members for 2 hours.
Yeah. And this is
and Joe, I know facilitation is a big you brought up before.
I wonder
yeah.
Sorry, you say you don't have game mechanics, but you're using narrative, right?
Yeah.
How is that narrative being formulated? Is this based on the participants, what they want? Do you create a scenario specific based on that, or do you already have something planned beforehand that is kind of adaptable? How do you incorporate narrative? Is it just situational, whatever comes up based on the premise? I have a very limited experience on LARP. I participated on a 1-day LARP horror theme based once, which was a lot of fun. But I'm really curious to hear what you have to say.
So we first we said we know the setting, what the setting is going to be. So a company who is going to have a reorganization, and this is their 2-day retreat with their management team. That's what we decided on first. Then we did the intake with the participants, and then from that we decided to think of, okay, what is the storyline going to be? For example, we said, okay, there has to be scarcity of resources. So it's a company in decline that used to be very rich, and now they have to compete amongst themselves for resources, and there's potential there for drama. Because our wonderful company is going down the drain, and it might be your fault or it might not be your fault. And for example, when we saw one of the learning goals for a very experienced participant was, how can I be a better interim? We decided to make him the interim CEO of the company, who will be introduced at that retreat for the first time. So that has a very big impact, we think, on the play. And it's only something that we came up with after we did the intake with the participants, but we will have, I think, 70% of the storyline of the narrative done before we start playing, and make sure that we do not overbook the actors in individual scenes, so that we can say, okay, we need something extra because something's happening, and maybe ask 1 or 2 actors to jump in and make an additional scene if necessary.
All right. If there are any burning questions, otherwise, thank you for going first and for being so generous with sharing your method and the models, and also your design, or at least some thoughts about your design. Would anyone else like to go next?
I can follow up. I'm working in a couple of projects, as you know. One of them is with Joe himself. So I'm currently working towards my dissertation topic. I'm still kind of like trying to figure that out, how I'm going to go about it. But to approach it, I made this like a preliminary study. It's like more, not a preliminary study, more like what's the word I'm looking for? just as I wanted to see if there was any like preliminary findings, and then use that as a justification to like then go bigger with a dissertation project. And I was looking at the intersection of leadership identity and role-playing games, and whether and not necessarily games that are designed for leadership learning, just the players in this particular case were playing Brindlewood Bay, which is an RPG where you are all grandmas. They kind of like think of Murder, She Wrote meets Lovecraft horror. So you're all different grannies, and like you're on this town. It's a small town, and the plot, like this murders start happening in town, and you're kind of like solving those crimes, and then realize it's like tied to a big cult, and they're trying to bring Cthulhu back, and all this other fun nonsense. But I watched, I want to say, 4 participants and the DM. 4 out of the 5 participants were women, and then there was a man who was playing. Who is a cisgender man, but he was playing a trans woman character, and it just became really, really interesting because I had interviews with 2 rounds of interviews with all of them, and I got to see one of the game sessions going on, and something that came up aside from just leadership, it was this idea of using a role-playing game as an opportunity to explore identities. Some of those were leadership identities, but there was also like sexual orientation and gender, and like among other identities that people had curiosity, and they were using that opportunity to explore it. And you saw, depending on how they saw themselves as leaders. For instance, there was a couple participants who see themselves as being more quiet or more introverted. Their leadership, the leadership that they would display in the role play was a lot more upfront, a lot more taking the reins of the situation and handling the group, and having these conversations like, hey, I saw you do this in the role play, but is that what you would do in real life? And they'll be like, I hope so someday. It's giving me a little bit of confidence to do so, but like as of right now, I will never be able to do so. So you start seeing them at least putting themselves in the shoes of like, well, my character can do it, so maybe I can do it in the future. And some others who were more experienced players, they will tell you like, absolutely, like so many of the things that I learned about dealing with people and leadership themselves, I learned them through role play games, throughout the years. So it was a really, really interesting project, and I'm thinking that my dissertation project is going to have something like that, like looking at role playing games and leadership identity in there. And then Joe, you can talk about the other one we're making if you want to.
Well, let's stick with this one. I have a question because it sounds super interesting. I forget the name, but there's a leader identity model, right? There's a rubric that I've seen for qualitative research about leader identity. All right, did you use that, or are you familiar with that?
No, it was just more about like I had like, I don't know, it was like each interview was like 10 sets of questions, and I was looking more about from their perspective. So I was not applying necessarily theory and how it was emerging, and probably that would be something while doing the actual dissertation project, where actually we'll be working with students, because we're all graduate adults, all of us in our 30s, and it was just more about like what they perceive leadership to be, and how was that being implemented by the characters and vice versa.
Any other questions for Antonio?
I just think that's a really interesting question. Not only how do you observe changes in perceptions of leadership, definitions of leadership, and self-identity as leaders during the game, but how does the game design and what kind of guided discovery do you need to design into the game to allow them to maximize their broadening their thinking on what is leadership and what is my role as a leader? That's
Absolutely.
A really interesting question.
And that is kind of like a big part of my actual dissertation project is that my argument from what I observed is that this game that we were playing was not meant for leadership learning. It was just a game for fun, yet leadership was happening constantly at two levels. You have the characters dealing with the situations that are coming up in the story, and then the players embodying those characters, cooperating between each other to make this a reality. So leadership's happening in two different spheres simultaneously. But what if we were more intentional about the design of that game? That is a game that's specifically meant to be teaching you leadership. And I think that could be exponential, like the gains from that, because the participants were able to see those results regardless of the game just being a game for fun.
Right, and that's of course is our long-term goal, is how do we design this so people can discover that they can be leaders in a social sense of leadership, not in the hierarchical leadership.
Yep.
Socially constructed leadership.
A quick question that has to do this. Did the participants know that they were going to be debriefed on leadership? Or was that only afterwards that you looked at it through that lens?
No, it was pretty upfront. So they started playing their game without me, and then I joined around session 5. I knew some of the participants. I didn't know like the other half of them, and I was looking for a convenient sample, really, that will allow me to like study them based on, because this was all like a project for a class that I was taking on qualitative methods. So once their game was ongoing and my friend had told me about that game that they were playing, I was like, would you and your group mind me, studying you for using you as a case study? And he was open to it. He brought it out to the group. They agreed to it. So there was a point in which they knew that I was going to be observing them for the next session. And before that first session, we had like our first round of interviews with all of them, in which, I got to talk a little bit about to them about who they were and their interests, what the character was, how they come out to create that character, what were they trying to accomplish by creating that specific character, as well as like previous experiences with RPGs. And it was a really interesting group because you have some players that were like, oh yeah, I played RPGs for the last 20 years. And others that were like, this is my first time playing an RPG ever. And then like I got to see them. And when my observation was just me, it's like if I was not there, I was just in the background listening with an other AI recording the interview. And then I got to, do like a little bit of analyzing my results. And based on Wallace's findings, I crafted the second round of questions, where we actually went a lot deeper into like their definition of leadership and the character and those intersections and what I observed.
And were you able to ask if there was a difference for them, how they dealt with leadership before you started observing them and afterwards?
I didn't specifically ask about whether like how me observing affected the way they acted, but I don't think that was a big issue in the sense that we were talking in general. And like the session that I observed was like not the one with the most, like leadership still happened, but it was, this game has like every 5-6 like I don't know, like every 5 sessions or so you have like a winding down session in which your characters heal like the curses and stuff that they've gotten by doing their hobbies. And so like they were doing gardening, and they were like doing having like a tea party and all these other things. And so like it was a lot of like conversation going on, and there was a couple of situational leadership things going on, like where they're trying to like steal there was the one to say notebook, but they were like role playing as ramen, so they call it like a lap book instead of like a laptop or a notebook. So it was the lap book, and it was a lot of like improvisational situation. But a lot of what they talked about, they were telling me about things that had happened in previous, like in the actual mysteries. So like, oh yeah, when this character got killed, and then we went to investigate, like this has happened, and then that character did this and that, and we all followed, and yada yada yada. So yeah, like the range of experience they were sharing were beyond that one session that I observed, and sometimes also about previous games. I was just checking out LARPing and RPGs in general.
That raises two really important questions. Of course, the whole methodological research methodologies of what kind of data can you capture without disturbing, big question. But I also like that in that design is the implicit or non-reflective periods built in for time for reflection and incubation of learning, because we know that to learn, people have to have that just time for the brain to do whatever we settle that needs to be interrupted with what it was doing, had time to think about and piece it together, and building that into the game where there is a natural break that is not, okay, we're going to stop now and debrief.
Yeah.
Right? Building that into the
that's
design,
an idea.
that's a really interesting concept of again, as a research question, how much of that do you need? How do you do that? And what effects do you have from it?
Right. And I think that's interesting ways to do it. Like Joe and I were talking about like a way to build this into a leadership learning situation. This is a famous video game franchise called Assassin's Creed. And like the premise of this is like they log into the memories of the person who like had his ancestor was like an assassin from this league or cult or whatever in like, you know, the 1200s or something like that. But like he goes in the machine and then like they're able to see what his ancestor did. And then you break out of the machine and you're back in the present, you're your own self. And that the machine is called the animus. And I was thinking it's like, if you incorporate some idea like the animus into leadership learning as your role playing, as in like you're all embodying your characters now, kind of like a Ready Player One situation, or in this case, an animus, in which like you're being transported, right? And then you're separated. And after you're being separated, part of your task is to reflect on that so that you can gain whatever you experience and actually make meaning of it and then bring it back into the game. Somehow you're giving them a reflection homework and now making it part of the narrative of the game itself. And I think that kind of promotes that motivation of like it has a purpose. And it might even push them to be more invested in the story if the game is rewarding them for doing that reflection as well.
That makes me think of a program that I tested. I did a test program this fall that actually Matt was part of. That was I think it was 4 sessions of 2 hours each, testing out a light version of D&D as a leadership development class, and it alternated between the reflective activities and the actual role play activities. And also, well, one of the takeaways was that we needed a lot more time. We scratched the surface kind of. We did some good work, but we needed a lot more time to get more into it. The other thing I'll say is that the idea of in-game, out-of-game, or on-game, off-game, depending on which terminology, this frame switching idea is something that I challenged a little bit in my dissertation, that at a group level, the character and player are not different, and that those are mental constructs that we create that differentiate character and player. And I don't know entirely what's really going on. But in terms of the leadership learning, individuals have a very clear idea when they're in character and when they're out of character. But observed at a group level, those, whether they're in character or out of character, are still meeting functions of the group and participating in leadership processes, kind of agnostically. So, which is fascinating from an adaptive leadership perspective too, and a group relations perspective. But that was actually something I was trying to leverage in the program that I tested this fall, where the characters that were created were used to create the role. The individual's developmental goals were used to create the role, similar to what Gijs was kind of talking about. But then the story that was created was somewhat improvised and emergent in nature, and allowed the character player boundary to be actually the tool, the mechanism for the development. That was the mechanism for reflection and for me in thinking about design and facilitation. Which also brings up the idea of facilitation, which is something that is part of the data that Antonio and I are writing up about right now. I collected some data in 2018, I think, from 400 D&D players in the United States. So we did a survey about psychological safety, group formation and cohesion, and creativity. And then I also created a scale to measure the facilitation of the dungeon master, because since they were D&D players. And we have some interesting findings that are basically, they confirm a few things. One, creativity is a part of the role-playing game experience in a tabletop role-playing game. And it is related to the group dynamic in terms of their psychological safety, both the clarity that they have and the direction that they feel from the person in charge, but the support from each other, and is indirectly influenced by the facilitation of the dungeon master. So facilitation matters, but facilitation alone doesn't create creativity. The facilitation matters as a major factor, but not the only factor in the group dynamic, and the group dynamic can create creativity. Something like that is where we haven't written the discussion yet, but that's what the data are kind of pointing to. And they also clarified there were 2 items that we dropped from the facilitation scale that were related to objects, the map and the linear plot. So we asked if the plot was linear and if they used physical maps and things like that. I think that's what it was. But anyway, they were objective mechanical pieces. Those were, when we did the factor analysis, were not part of the factor in facilitation. The facilitation items were much more geared towards the narrative and the interpersonal interactions of the dungeon master. So that is particularly interesting in how we set up the facilitation of these and the design of these types of experiences, more so than mechanics, I think.
Which makes sense. Like, you have amazing dungeon masters that can use this theater of the mind and immerse players, and if they use good narrative and are good at describing, like, all of a sudden players don't need a squared map. We're saying, where am I located and where is the target? It just becomes a lot more of like, we're just rolling with it.
But did you see, so my naive intuition would be that good facilitation can spark and increase creativity, and poor facilitation could stifle it.
So what our analysis suggests is that good facilitation impacts a good group dynamic, but does not directly create on its own creativity.
Right.
Which is a little bit contrary to the assumption that good facilitation results in good creativity. It certainly contributes to the conditions that are necessary for creativity, but it is not directly related in our data to creativity. We did not test, and I don't think we have the data to do this, to see if bad facilitation cancels creativity. I don't think the way we said our data couldn't address that. But what we do know is that the group dynamic definitely influences creativity.
Right, and I think that would be creativity is we would have to define creativity But if it's an individual measure or a group collective, then it would have to be mediated by the group dynamics and safety.
Yeah, our items were
interesting.
More individually based. There's not a good measure for group creativity. And when we did the factor analysis, if there was group creativity in our scales, we ended up with 2 different scales. There were 2 different factors. One was about the group and one was about creativity.
Right. And even, measuring creativity and defining it in and of itself is a whole big can of worms.
And we used pre-existing measures for everything except for facilitation. So all the psychological safety and creativity measures are pre-made constructs.
What I found in my research on leadership is that a bad leader also creates creativity, but then to go around the bad leader. I've seen that happen. We did 36 times, and a couple of them had bad leaders, and that were one of the more creative ones. But so I think bad DMs bad facilitators can lead to more creativity, but just without the facilitator.
They could, but it is then you're into, do you get the outcomes you're looking for? Right.
Is it the right creativity?
Is it the right, or is it the right learning outcomes that you're going to get?
It seems to me what I'm hearing is that basically facilitation doesn't create or negate creativity, but it affects the probabilities of creativity occurring by creating an environment in which it's easier or less easy for creativity to arise.
Yeah, because the facilitation is a very strong impact on the group. And so it definitely can impact the group dynamic significantly enough that it could alter or intentionally create conditions for creativity or not. And these were all players just taking a survey online about their games that they play for fun. This was not in an educational setting, most of the students, we didn't even ask if they were students or not. It was just an online survey. And then, so we don't know if they were students, and we asked them about the most recent game they played of Dungeons and Dragons specifically. So it's interesting that, psychological safety, both from the facilitation and from other group members, and creativity were present in playing this game. And then if we were to try and add our intentionality to it and facilitate leadership development or educational outcomes alongside that, that's kind of the positioning of these results, is that it supports the idea on a pretty large scale. 400 participants, we have pretty significant results that this type of activity creates the opportunity for that type of experience. And that facilitation certainly matters, but not necessarily directly in the way that we thought, which also suggests food for thought, not necessarily conclusive evidence, that it's the group dynamic that we're really working with, which is, I think, a refreshing take on studying leadership, that we shouldn't just focus on the person in charge, although authority matters and all of that with adaptive leadership. But in terms of studying different types of leadership, studying leadership as a group process is definitely supported and suggested as further directions by the data that we've analyzed.
Leadership is those set of social processes, 5 social processes that have to work for leadership to happen, to emerge. Joe, I don't want to cut off discussion. It is 25 minutes past. I want to respect anyone who needs to leave, or but I also want to hear what Gary has to say. So just time check.
Yeah, well, Gary and Matt haven't shared yet, but if you'd like to, you don't have to. And of course, anyone can pop off at any time.
I'm happy to share, but I'm mindful that it's very late for Matt, so I'm not time constrained. So Matt, if you'd like to speak next, please.
Okay, thank you. You're quite right. So I can share a few ideas, but I'm really tired, sorry. So mostly what I do and use and research is connected to psychodrama. Maybe you are familiar with it or not, but psychodrama is quite strong in Middle Europe, especially in Germany. And my problem with it is that it's very protagonist centered, so it's focusing on one person. So it's quite similar with the problem of leadership and followership, so leaders and followers. But I'm also part of a working group in the Hungarian Psychodrama Association, which works on systemic solutions, because one of our most important lessons is that even if the protagonist in the psychodramatic exercise has some kind of valuation, they often cannot do anything in real life because the system, the social structures, doesn't let them change their roles or behaviors. So we are working we are trying to find methods that can help the participants to do actual change. So yeah, and one of the techniques we use, it's called reality check, is that after someone invented a solution to their, for example, leadership problem, we are using the other participants to suggest how the society will react to these changes in their behavior. So they will they will see their futures, how they can practice their future self, so to speak. Yeah. Do you have any questions?
I'd say we're getting into that the whole question of unit of analysis, individual, group, extended group that includes the facilitators and actors or NPCs and whatnot. Interesting.
So what has the question? I'm not sure.
Wasn't really a question. It was just an observation
of
the research, the unit of analysis we're talking about. Are we looking at the group dynamics? Are we looking at individuals? What's the role of that extended group where the facilitator is a role model for leadership? In any kind of facilitator is always a role model for the leadership that you're doing, so that that they're going to influence group dynamics that way. So you can...
Do you have a proposed solution or experiment to deal with the protagonist problem?
I don't have, but our group is working on it, and we have nice tools which might work. We need to work on it, so it's quite experimental right now. But just as I said, for example, the reality check technique seems to be very helpful for the protagonist. Yeah. My idea is that you already mentioned it, so we are talking about the level of analysis, that maybe we should not do protagonist play, but some kind of dyadic, so 2-person level or 3-person level work. So people who want to change have some support, so they can practice in the psychodramatic space how they can support each other in the change, so they won't be alone when facing society. Yeah, that's one of our directions, but no real experiment yet. And right now it's very close to team coaching and stuff like that in this direction.
Do you usually play with or without an audience?
Never with an audience. So only the group plays. So everyone is the audience and the player at the same time.
But will
so we don't do it for an audience.
But will everybody be playing at the same time, or will
not necessarily? Not necessarily. in psychodrama, usually the protagonist chooses others for roles. So some of the participants might be passive in one play, but they are also part of the group. So they are not strangers. They are part of the working group that try to solve problems. Yeah.
It might be interesting to see what happens if you have different protagonists in at the same time. So with LARPing, everybody is a protagonist, and they use each other for support. So if you take away that, people have to see it, even if they're part of the group. But 3 scenes with 3 protagonists happen in the same setting, and they can then add in the others that might take away the protagonist problem a bit more. Just a random thought. I'm not sure if it works within the formal setting of psychodrama as it's usually done, but.
Yeah, I see. Thanks. And maybe we can mention that with Hayes we are planning. It's a strong word, but we are planning to do something about role-playing and leadership development at Knutpunkt 2023. Maybe you know this Scandinavian conference about LARP. So if you plan to be in Denmark around May, then you can join us.
Yes, please.
I'll be very interested to hear how that goes later on too, even if I can't make it. But will it be in English? Oh, good. I might be in France in May, so we'll see. I can just hop over.
That's close by. I mean, come on.
All right. Gary, would you like to share or any interest or what you're working on?
Yeah, sure. I mean, first of all, I won't be offended if anybody has to go, so don't feel like you need to stick around, or that I'll take it personally. And a lot of this is me learning different languages that people are using to describe some of the things that we've either done intuitively in part of our design, or some of the more formal academic approaches to it. The background is that we used to teach the course, a colleague of mine used to teach the course for World Bank staff working in fragile and conflict-affected countries. And so we had a fictional country that was given to us by the United Nations, and used that fictional country over a 4-day or 5-day course with kind of breakout sessions where people came up with a recovery plan for this country. They had roles assigned. There wasn't a lot of role playing. There was just the basics of understanding kind of the technical components of how you design a recovery plan for a country affected by conflict. I could go into a lot more detail on that, but I won't. Suffice to say that we knew that there was more potential there for that country experience called Karana. We knew there was more potential there for learning, and that after both of us left the bank, we started working on, well, what would it look like if there was an adaptive leadership course that was then built around this fictional country. And so we've designed a simulation. It's interesting, a number of the things that have been brought up already that we've kind of incorporated. It's a 1-day course for 10 participants. They take on roles. They're given, pre-matter and some learning and some reading to do about adaptive leadership. And then in the morning, we start with a kind of coffee introduction for them in role. And so this is their kind of first opportunity to be able to kind of familiarize themselves with roles. But then we have 6 to 8 scenes that we do throughout the day that are different configurations. They're each a different scenario. different configurations of those roles. The other participants are kind of on the balcony, using an adaptive leadership term, and kind of monitoring the scene and seeing what's going on. So they're vested because they're still the roles and the characters, and that the conflation that you were talking about, Joe, between the role and the people that are involved in the process, right, is ever present there. But it's also interesting the degree to which people start to understand when they are in role, this is the role playing that they're doing, and when they're out of role, this is the kind of moment for reflection. And then kind of explaining to them what moments of reflection or the kind of balcony, the value of that is in adaptive leadership, is also kind of a meta kind of level of understanding, right, that we're kind of tapping into. Each of the scenes kind of concludes and they have a moment where they can reflect. So it's interesting also that people mentioned that there was reflection. And then we conclude at the end of the day with both an in-character debrief, why did you do what you did, and then out of character kind of hot wash about adaptive leadership. And what's interesting about it is we're working with a third colleague, Mark, who was the one that connected me to you guys, you all. But Mark is he's an adaptive leadership coach at NYU Silver, and he teaches on adaptive leadership. And Laura has trained a lot on adaptive leadership. We've run it twice now, once for kind of an alpha audience at United States Institute for Peace and some US government, and another one at the Kroc School of Peace in San Diego. And we're gearing up for another delivery to the UN, and that'll be our kind of last beta test. And then we'll, after that, be ready to have it as a product, a thing that we're teaching and experimenting with. One of the challenging questions that I still have is, how do I know whether people are actually learning adaptive leadership? And so we're actually proposing a kind of a control group test with the US government, where we would do a delivery with the adaptive leadership stuff built into it and a non-adaptive leadership kind of, let's just play the game and see what happens. And then have some kind of surveys that are attached to that. So I'd love to learn more about what empirics you're all using for knowing what impact is. Lots of other stuff that we could talk about. But one other thing quickly is that in the course of my being a gamer and thinking about gaming and about peace building, I've also been involved in PAX Sims, which you all might want to look at. It's run by Rex Bryden at McGill University. And if anybody ever wants to do like a guest blog post for that, or if you're interested in connections in DC, which is the wargaming community connections, but I think that those are interesting kind of, you talked about identifying who this audience is or who this kind of community is, Joe, and I think those are people you might be interested in connecting with and that. So connections, I think they're still accepting applications for sessions for this summer. So that I'll stop there. Happy to answer any questions.
What was the name of it? PAX what? Sorry.
Oh, PAX. PAX Sims. Yeah, I'll just put the link in the chat.
That's awesome. I have so much to talk about adaptive leadership stuff. Measuring adaptive leadership in any learning setting is very challenging, and all the role play stuff too. This is fascinating. I can see like dozens of potential cross collaborations and things like that. In the interest of time, I'll conclude this section of us sharing the work that we're working on. We do hope in the future to invite Samantha to present her research. If there are other people who have ideas for topics for future roundtables, maybe being a little bit more topically specific or anything like that, please let us know. And just a show of hands here, is anyone here interested in attending the International Leadership Association?
I would love to, but I cannot leave the country until my green card is issued.
Yeah, same
Yeah,
problem.
yeah, when and where would be my question.
It's
So
in
October.
Vancouver, Canada in October.
Not sure I'll
Oh,
manage to come over
Here's
that
okay, you
side.
know what? Never mind, because they also have an online conference.
Ah,
So they do like 2 days online, and then a week later they do 4 days in person. So I think it would be a fantastic symposium if we were to submit, very similar to what we've done here, actually. Where for the way ILA does symposiums is we would, as a group, put one submission forward for an entire session that includes like 5 presentations on related but distinct topics. So we would present on what we've all presented on here, essentially. And then we have a chair and a commenter to kind of lead the discussion amongst whoever shows up to the session. The submission format for that is basically, a few paragraphs from each of the individual presenters, and then an overall kind of like a page or two about the collected, symposium and what the point of this symposium would be. But I think we have more than enough to go off of. If any of you would be willing to, the commitment would be to submit the paragraph or two description as your part of the proposal that would be due in February, and then to either join us to live online during the conference to be part of the symposium, or in 1 or 2 cases it would be possible to have a pre-recorded presentation. But I think they didn't sanction that. I just said I'd be willing to screen share your video, but to have actually be present to give the presentation and have the discussion with participants and each other. So interest in that?
Yeah, if it's online, I can do it. I just cannot leave the United States for the next year or so.
Awesome. So I'll initiate an email chain to everybody on the list, even the people who didn't make it tonight, for you to confirm whether or not you're able to and see what it's all about, and I'll send more info. So great.
And
That's
I will
awesome.
also we have a mailing list for this topic that I will invite everyone to.
Great. Wow, I wish we had another hour to keep going. But I'll wrap it up, the formal program at that point, and leave it to us to connect with each other, to follow up on the conferences in Denmark or PAX Sims, if interested in those types of things, and to stay in touch as much as we can over the next 6 months, a year, whenever we're doing things. Any other closing remarks from anyone? Thank you for being here. This was really enriching praxis and the implementation of theory and practice of how we're developing these things is really cool. So I think we made progress.
There's huge value in pulling out some of these questions and topics. The one that came up for me when Gary was talking, with some of the work that's been done with doing LARPing in natural settings. So at a museum, you kind of have a mini scenario, and how you can use that kind of micro training to develop some of these concepts. Some of us can't put people in a training room for 2 days. We have to capture them in the wild, and that's a whole nother ball game experience. So the value in what are these questions and topics? Maybe we can work on that.
Okay.
So with that,
yep,
I will say thank you all very much. I think we're concluding our scheduled program. We will send you a transcript of the recording when it's available and such for your preview. I'll invite you to a mailing list, and we can continue on. And I think reach out to each other. And I certainly have some people that I would like to talk to further about potential partner collaboration opportunities. And if anyone would like to stay, so thank you all for joining us. And if anyone would like to stay and continue the discussion, we can certainly do that.
I'd love to stay, but it's a 1:45 past midnight, and I have to get up tomorrow. So
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah.
See you later. Thank you.
Thank
for the
you
invitation.
for joining.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.